loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.
Welcome to Making It Last podcast. I'm your host, Noreen Daly, where it's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, but with other people. And it's time for another conversation. And this time, we're going to be talking with Karen Tibbals, author of Persuade, Don't Preach. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Noreen. Glad to be here.
So before we get into the conversation, tell us a little bit about your book, Persuade, Don't Preach.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about my book. So the title of the book says to me that what we need to think about is, instead of preaching what we believe, we need to think about how we can persuade someone. And I'm sure, Noreen, with your background in communications, you understand that you need to understand what's going on with the other person before you can convince them from somebody. But instead, what the research shows is that we tend to talk from our own belief system, and we don't really pay attention to what the other person believes. So it comes off as preaching. And as the saying goes, when you preach, you're only preaching to the choir. And the people that you really want to convince don't listen to you. They don't pay any attention because they know they don't agree with you because of the way you're talking.
You know what is interesting? Go ahead.
So you need to change the way you're approaching things. And the research shows, so I'm referring to research by professors Rob Willer and Matt Feinberg, who's done a number of studies in this area. And they've shown that when you talk from your own belief system, it actually boomerangs and people solidify in what they believe. So instead of you convincing somebody, you're actually triggering them to believe in what they already believe in.
You know, I'm literally gonna have you come back for us to talk about that, because I literally just thought of a topic while you were talking.
Great.
So you're gonna come back just for that, where we're gonna talk some more about your book. So let's get into the reason that we're having this conversation, which we're gonna be talking about how can one restore a broken relationship. So as to set a context, Karen, in your mind, when you think of a broken relationship, just define that a little bit to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Well, when I say a broken relationship, I'm talking about a relationship that's broken because of a difference over a social or political belief.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about the normal conflicts, because what's happened is our society has gotten much more polarized recently, and so we tend to disagree about new things. And it's breaking up relationships. It broke up a relationship with my aunt that I had a few years ago, and I see examples of it on the internet all the time, where people say, "I can't stand what my mother or I can't stand what my friend is saying or my neighbor," and they do things like they call names and they yell, or they break off the relationship, like I did with my aunt. So what I'm trying to communicate in my book and in the work that I'm doing is that we need to come up with a new way to talk to the other person, a way that we recognize what the belief system that's underneath what they're saying. And just to back up a sec, before we get there, one of the key parts is we need to separate the person from the values that they hold, and then from the positions they take on the issues. Those are three separate things. And too often we group them together and we call the person evil because we think the position they take on the issue is evil. And that's why we break off the relationship and we name call. And we don't need to do that. If we can see them as separate, then we can start to get some distance from it and not be as emotionally involved. And and recognize that it's the position that they're taking on the issue that you disagree with or you think is immoral. And it may be an immoral position.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not judging this right now. I'm just talking in theoretical terms.
Right.
But the reason, and then you can start to understand that the position they're taking on the issue actually reflects the values that they hold. And there are positive values. I mean, I know we can look at actions that people take and positions they take and say, it's immoral to lock up people or whatever the position is.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why they're doing that, they're doing it for a reason that they think is valid.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can start to understand what that reason is, then we can start to do something about it.
So before you continue, though, what are some of the things on a practical level that you think we can do to try to be open to finding out that reason? Do you think in some way that some of us probably need to work on just how open we are, as I just said, or maybe just trying to be more tolerant of other people's views and ideologies?
I think what we need to do is, first of all, we need to stop reacting. Okay, because we need to slow things down because our reactions are so fast. And we need to become aware of what's driving our reactions. Why are we reacting so fast? And what are our own values? I mean, our values are they're like the air. They're invisible to us.
Yes.
We don't see them. We don't recognize them, and we don't realize that that's what's driving us. If we can get in touch with our own values, then we can begin to start to see what somebody else's values are. Because we all have the same values. The research shows, and this comes from the moral foundation theory, which was popularized by Jonathan Haidt, and what he has found cross-culturally is that we all have the same 5 values. The foundational one is belonging to a group.
Mm-hmm.
So the group that we belong to drives what our belief system is. And then there's the sacredness of purity, which is what we find sacred.
Yes.
Respect for authority, fairness, and care for others. So all humans in all cultures have those same 5 values, but we express them differently.
Yes.
And we give different importance to them. And when you can identify what the value is that's driving their behavior, then you can start to have some distance from the position. You can start to calm down a little bit. And then the really interesting part is that you can then use another value that's important to people and do what's called reframing and use a different value to support your position. And you can get people, even if you can't get them to agree with you, you can get them to listen to you in a new way. So you can just change the conversation and restore the relationship because you're demonstrating that you understand what's important to the other person. By doing that, you are being true to what you believe. You haven't changed your position. You're getting the conversation going, and you can restore the relationship. And I think that this is just a phenomenal technique. It was pioneered by, again, those same gentlemen I mentioned earlier, Rob Willer and Matt Feinberg. They've done research to show that it works on a group level, but what nobody has done is they haven't turned it into a technique for interpersonal relationships. And that's what I'm doing in my book, Persuade, Don't Preach, is I'm giving you the understanding of the technique and the tools for how to do it. What are the steps you need to take to do it?
I know you've been enjoying the conversation, but we're going to take a little break and get a word from our sponsor. So, The whole idea of a branding strategy sounded so exotic and so fancy to me. But after having several conversations with Neon, I now have a clearer understanding. I am sure of what my identity is, what it is that I want people to see Noreen Daly as. Thanks, Neon. Thanks, Splint. Visit them at wearesplint.com. I I am pausing for a bit because today has been a challenging day for me. And some of what you're saying, I'm literally sitting back and I'm saying, okay, I really need to apply this right this minute so it can help me to calm down and reframe a situation that I'm currently, trying to work through, because I'm feeling a little flustered about it because I think I'm being asked to do something that I'm not comfortable doing and I'm just not going to do it. And I know it might have far-reaching implications. So what you're saying is actually resonating on a personal level for me right now. So I'm appreciating and I'm hoping that somebody who's listening will be saying the same thing. But Karen, there's some people that are hearing you saying all of this research that it's done by X, done by Y. And they might be thinking, ma'am, all of what you're saying sounds academic and it sounds philosophical and it sounds profound. But what is it on a practical level if it is that at this point I believe that I need to reconnect with a family member, with an aunt, with my son, with my sister? What would you say to them?
Well, and that's what I tried to do in the book, because that's the missing piece. Because, like I said, and you said, all this research has been done on an academic level, but nobody's actually applied it to personal relationships. So I'm actually starting a new newsletter, which is free. Anybody can sign up for it. And it's called Fractured Relationships.
Fractured? Okay.
Fractured Relationships. And in the newsletter, I'm going to highlight stories of people whose relationships are fractured. And then I'm going to give suggestions on how to apply their technique. Because it's one thing to know the theory, but it's another thing to apply to it. So I was on another podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the woman told me a story about her neighbor, where her neighbor is gardening. They're both out gardening and the neighbor is playing some really offensive content very loudly. And it's disturbing the podcast host. She just hates what she's listening to, so she doesn't go out and garden. And she doesn't know what to do. She just doesn't know what to do. So I was on this interview with a woman, and she tells me this, and I wish I could have come up with an answer for her right then and there, and I couldn't, because it takes a while. And it took me a few days, and I came up with some ideas, and the ideas had to do with applying the value system that the woman is probably, some values that she adheres to, probably. I mean, I'm guessing, but there are overall patterns, so I can guess pretty accurately. And I came up with an idea to tell her, for instance, what my suggestion was for her to talk to her neighbor and say, I come out here to garden because obviously I want my garden to look good, but also because I'm communing with nature. And I said, I don't know if you believe in God, but if you do any prayer or anything when you're out there and you communicate with God, that would be a good thing to say also. And then say to her, what do you do when you're out gardening? What are you doing besides just gardening? And try to get some commonalities there. Try to get something to agree on. And then to say, well, when something is really loud, music or whatever, it really disturbs me, gets in the way. And so I'd really appreciate it if you turned down the volume. And it sounds so simple, okay? Now that I've said it, it sounds simple, but she didn't come up with it, and I didn't come up with it right away. This takes some time to work through.
Yeah, yeah. That would you say that all of what you said can be applied to relationships right across the board, or it might be easier for some types of relationships?
I think it depends on the issue. I think it can apply to any relationship. I can apply to coworkers. It can apply to family members. It can apply to, as I said, neighbors, friends. But, there's a lot of good techniques about how to restore relationships for other issues, but there's no techniques for restoring relationships that are broken because of political differences or value differences. So this is new stuff. This is a new way of thinking about things.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. If it is that from all of what you said, somebody's still cynical and you want to just encapsulate it in like a 3-step process, what would that process be in terms of how they can restore that, type of broken relationship?
Well, what you need to do is you need to understand what your value system is, what the other person's value system is, and then you have to think about how you can use that person's value system to make your point about whatever you want to say.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we say bye from this podcast?
Please read my book, Persuade, Don't Preach.
Thank you so much, Karen, author of Persuade, Don't Preach. It was a pleasure having you, and I am definitely sure that you will be on again.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, this was Making It Last podcast. I'm your host, Noreen Daly. Until next time.
Making it last is all I care to do. You loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.